Behind the facade of a perfect marriage, where every morning begins with a favorite mug and evenings drift by in black and white films, a crack quietly forms. He is strength, stability, sincerity. She is lost in routine, craving something different. When a woman bursts into her life, radiating boldness and freedom, the familiar world starts to crumble, slowly but irreversibly. The desire to try new rules becomes the beginning of the end. He doesn't scream. He doesn't seek revenge. He gathers the shards and turns them into a weapon. No threats, no dirt, just facts, words, truth. While she drowns in a freedom that tastes like loneliness, he collects the voices of those forgotten, men reduced to background characters in someone else's game. And when it all erupts in a public reckoning, where silence cuts deeper than any scream, only one question remains. What's left when exposure isn't vengeance, but the art of saying, enough? Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watch this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Marin had always moved through life with quiet precision, a kind of graceful caution that made her seem unshakable. Even as a child, she remembered her grandmother's gentle wisdom. Love wasn't fireworks or sweeping declarations. It was devotion, plain and enduring. Marin had clung to that notion like scripture, especially after meeting Reed Whittaker at 14. He had sunlit freckles, an off-center grin, and eyes that made her believe the world could be kind. Their love wasn't a sudden blaze. It was a slow, deliberate burn. It took root in shared textbooks during midnight cramming sessions, in murmured talks under trees gilded with autumn, in the unspoken comfort of just being there for each other. When Marin's mother died in a car accident during her final year of high school, it was Reed who held her hand at the funeral, who sat beside her in the stillness afterward, who made coffee at dawn when sleep refused to come. He became her anchor. By 25, he was thriving in cybersecurity, and Marin had established a strong footing in product marketing at a flourishing startup. They were married in a modest ceremony, surrounded by those who'd watched their story unfold. They settled into a townhouse in West Ridge, building a life of small, shared rhythms. Fridays were spent piecing together puzzles over takeout, Saturdays wandering through farmers' markets, Sundays wrapped in blankets watching Marin's beloved black and white films. A decade passed this way, peaceful, predictable, full of quiet love. But as Marin approached her mid-30s, something began to stir beneath the surface. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like a creeping dullness. Time passed, yet something inside her was slowly dimming. She still loved Reed. That was never in question. But love wasn't the issue. She was. She had become a softened echo of her former self. Each day blurred into the next, marked by the same coffee mug, the same affectionate chatter, the same tender kisses on her forehead that used to leave her breathless. The gestures were still loving. The devotion was real. But the urgency, the raw pull of desire, the hunger, was gone. She couldn't bring herself to tell Reed. How could she, when he still looked at her as though she hung the stars? When he still brought home her favorite cookies just because? When he still left sweet notes scrawled on the bathroom mirror? The problem wasn't him. It was the missing spark. And then Eden arrived. Eden joined Marin's team like a lightning bolt, fierce, magnetic, impossible to ignore. At 30, she was brash and unapologetic, always brimming with tales of moonlit drives and impulsive road trips. She wore her independence like a badge of honor and spoke with fearless conviction. But it wasn't her fire that captivated Marin. It was the way Eden saw her. One afternoon, over a forgettable lunch, Eden looked Marin in the eye and asked, "Do you ever feel like you're drifting through a life you never really chose?" The question lodged deep in Marin's chest and refused to leave. At night, as Reed lay sleeping beside her, The words echoed louder and louder. Soon, their casual office banter evolved into something more intimate. Their conversations spilled past project deadlines and office gossip. Eden shared that she'd been in an open relationship for years. "Monogamy is just a social myth," she said one evening over gelato. "Why put limits on love?" Marin wanted to argue. She wanted to slam the door shut on the growing crack inside her. But something inside her gave way. She began to weigh Eden's unpredictable passion against Reed's steady warmth. She compared the wild electricity of Eden's lips, after a spontaneous, reckless Friday night, with the familiar comfort of Reed's. The line had been crossed, and Marin knew there was no returning to the person she'd been before. Crushed under the weight of her guilt, emotional, physical, undeniable, Marin finally gathered the courage to talk to Reed. That night he looked exhausted, but still gave her his gentle smile, poured her chamomile tea, and asked how her day had gone. That's when she unraveled everything. She said she needed change, something different, something daring. She said the words, "open marriage." Reed didn't yell. His face didn't twist in fury. Instead, it broke, quietly. "There's someone else, isn't there?" he asked, his voice stripped of emotion. Marin hesitated. She spoke of Eden, her freedom, her perspective, her boldness. But Reed wasn't naive. He read her silences better than her words. He didn't argue. He didn't accuse. He simply stood, packed a small overnight bag, and took the couch. The silence that descended on their home the next morning was heavier than any screaming match could have been. Still, Marin held on to hope that maybe this detour could become a path forward, that together they could redefine what had been lost. What she failed to realize then was this: the first crack hadn't broken between them. It had split open inside her. The night Reed agreed to attend one of Eden's gatherings with Marin, something inside him shifted. But it wasn't a gesture of peace. It wasn't reconciliation. It was the beginning of a slow, quiet retreat. "I'll go," he said softly. "Not because I believe in it, but because you do." And that sentence, spoken with heartbreaking gentleness, was the loudest warning of all. Marin was lost in the haze of her own delusion. She clung to the idea that something bold, something out of the ordinary, might breathe life back into the hushed erosion of their closeness. She spent nearly an hour sifting through her wardrobe, choosing a look that struck the balance, elegant yet restrained. She hoped Reed would want her again, see her as he once did. Maybe even with the same longing that strangers might feel upon first glance. That quiet, aching wish was the truth she couldn't admit to herself. When she finally emerged in a deep burgundy dress, Reed barely lifted his eyes. His shirt was crisp, his grooming meticulous, but the warmth once found in his gaze, those eyes that used to follow her with tenderness, had turned cold and unreadable. They rode in silence toward the mansion, the only sounds the click of the blinker and the soft hum of tires on rain-slick pavement. Marin's hand fluttered nervously against her clutch. Reed kept his stare fixed on the road. The house rose before them, like a temple built for temptation. Iron gates, dim golden lights, and laughter that spilled out into the night like a spell. Marin pushed down the unease in her chest. Reed's jaw tightened. Eden opened the door, poised and magnetic, every bit the siren of the evening. Her satin jumpsuit shimmered beneath the entryway lights, her lips a polished Merlot. She embraced Marin with practiced warmth. But when she turned to Reed, her smile faltered, just for a second. She sensed it. That tightly leashed tension coiled behind his calm demeanor. Inside, everything gleamed with a surreal luster. Champagne flutes chimed, hands grazed skin, couples glided like silhouettes in a stylized dream, one spun from refinement and quiet seduction. Marin's heartbeat surged. Whether from dread or thrill, she couldn't tell. They floated through the rooms like visitors in someone else's fantasy. Brielle, one of Eden's friends, outlined the boundaries. Consent was absolute. No pressure. Every step was a choice. Reed responded with a nod, lips sealed. A man in a tailored navy suit approached them, his partner at his side, a woman with cool green eyes and an air of quiet confidence. The conversation stayed polite, brushing over literature, pets, wine preferences. Then, almost imperceptibly, the woman's fingers grazed Reed's arm. The man complimented Marin's poise. Something shifted. Reed's answers grew sharper, careful. Each syllable tasted of restraint. But Marin caught the faint flutter of his pulse at his temple. She drew him aside into a shadowed corner. "Are you okay?" she asked in a whisper. "No," he said, his voice stripped bare. "This doesn't feel real. Like I walked into someone else's hallucination. I thought we agreed." "You thought wrong," he snapped, his eyes suddenly fierce. "You decided. I'm doing what I can to hold this together." A wave of shame washed over her, but pride anchored her silence. They stayed a little longer. Marin made small talk. Reed receded, becoming part of the background. When she turned again, he had vanished. She found him in the car, hunched over the steering wheel, breath ragged. He didn't lift his head when she got in. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He gave no reply. The drive back was like a wake. Once inside their apartment, he walked straight to the closet, pulling out a backpack and loading it with clothes, socks, jeans, faded sweatshirts. Marin stood frozen at the entrance. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "I'm going." "For how long?" "As long as it takes to remember who I am." "You promised to try." "I did," he said quietly. "I walked into that place, Marin. I watched strangers touch you. I listened to them flirt with my wife. And I watched you let them. That's not fair." "What's unfair," he said, zipping the bag closed, "is calling this love when what you really wanted was permission to break it." Her breath caught in her throat. He slung the bag over his shoulder and paused before the door. For a moment, his expression softened. "I loved you," he said, "but I don't know who you are anymore. And I'm done shrinking to fit the fantasy you've been chasing." Then he was gone. And Marin crumbled. The apartment swallowed her in its silence. She couldn't bring herself to wash his mug. His hoodie still hung on the back of the chair, and every time she walked past it, a scream clawed at her throat. The next day, Eden called. "So how'd it go?" she asked. "I don't know," Marin murmured. "He left." A silence stretched between them. "Well, that's his path," Eden said eventually. But the words felt weightless. The days blurred together. Marin kept up appearances at work, but even Eden's laughter had lost its sparkle. At night, she sat with a glass of wine, watching old films that used to move her. Now, they left her hollow. A week passed before Reed came back. Not to return. Only to say goodbye. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table that once echoed with laughter over late-night poker games and messy dinners gone wrong. Now, silence pressed between them. He told her the love hadn't disappeared. It had simply shifted into something that wounded more than it warmed. He was done. He wanted a divorce. Marin didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just let the tears trace quiet lines down her face. When he left that day, he didn't come back. That chapter was over. But something else was beginning. Though Reed was gone, he hadn't disappeared. He was watching, calculating. He wasn't a man to shout or slam doors. He was the type who studied the board before making his next move. And Marin? She had no idea. Reed hadn't crashed on a buddy's couch. He hadn't checked into a hotel or buried himself in grief the way Marin might have guessed. He'd gone to stay in his brother's apartment above a garage in East Elm, remote still, and just quiet enough for introspection. But he wasn't grieving anymore. He was dissecting. Day by day, he sat hunched at a folding desk, his old laptop glowing through the night, spreadsheets blinking open and closed like slow, deliberate thoughts. Outwardly, he was taking tech freelance gigs, his usual fallback. Beneath the surface, he was unraveling the threads of his life with Marin, layer by layer. If she had spun their story from pretty fabrications, Reed was going to reconstruct it with brutal clarity and make sure she saw it too. He didn't want to destroy her. He wanted her to feel what it was like to be cast off, discarded like something outdated during someone else's reinvention. His memory was razor sharp. He remembered the look in her eyes whenever Eden's name came up, the overly careful words she chose to explain her need for space, the way she coded betrayal in soft guilt, pretending it was some form of growth. Reed wasn't angry anymore. He was lucid. He launched a journaling app, not for therapy, not for healing, for documentation. He titled it The Marin Collapse. Each entry was a fragment of what they had shared, the moment they first held hands, their tiny, cramped first place. Her favorite roast of coffee, the way she'd erupt with laughter at terrible B-movies. And then came the changes, her smile losing definition, her touch turning mechanical, the rise of late nights and vague excuses. He cataloged it all. Quietly, Reed began reconnecting. Former friends they'd let go of, old colleagues, and finally, Nina. Nina had once been a college acquaintance who'd approached Marin for marketing work. Marin had brushed her off without a second glance. Reed remembered how Nina had walked away, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Now she was a branding expert specializing in emotional recovery and personal storytelling. When Reed reached out, she was intrigued. He didn't unload everything, just small, intentional pieces. Just enough. "This isn't revenge," Nina told him. "It's about reclaiming your story, taking it back." Reed nodded. That was the word. Reclaim. But deep down, he wanted something more. Not vengeance that burned bridges. Something colder, sharper, a shift in her emotional foundation. And elsewhere, Marin was starting to unravel. She stopped answering Eden's messages, skipped their usual lunches. Her phone buzzed with flippant jokes, hollow invitations, half-hearted check-ins, but she didn't respond. Then came the moment that undid everything. They met in a small cafe, sunlight spilling through the windows. Their drinks sat untouched between them. Marin fixed her eyes on Eden. "Don't you ever worry someone will figure it out?" she asked quietly. Eden's brow arched. "Figure out what?" "All of it. The parties, the scene, the choices." Eden let out a short laugh. "Please, my fiancé's clueless. Always will be." Marin blinked. "What?" "I mean, come on," Eden said, smirking. "I don't even go anymore. That was a phase." Marin's chest tightened. "But you said—" "I told you what you needed to hear," Eden said calmly. "You were gasping for air. I gave you a little push." Marin stared at her, eyes wide. "So it was a game to you?" Eden didn't flinch. "Freedom means different things to different people. You were trapped. I handed you options." "You gave me a coffin," Marin said, barely above a whisper. She stood, collected her bag, and left without another word. That night, her body trembled uncontrollably. She tried to pour a drink to steady her nerves, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. Alone in the living room, no Reed, no Eden, no lies to cushion the fall, Marin sat in absolute stillness. She was free. And devastated. 2 weeks went by. Then a letter arrived, not from Reed, but from a law office. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, confidential. The location, an art gallery downtown, a neutral site. When Marin walked in, she was shocked to find not just the attorney, but Nina and Reed seated beside her. He didn't look like the man who had walked away weeks ago. He looked sharp, calm, unshaken. "Marin," he said, his voice steady. "Sit down." She did, confused and tense, heart thudding in her chest. Reed slid a tablet toward her. "What is this?" "A summary of what you missed while chasing novelty." The screen flickered to life, revealing a campaign, equal parts brand message, personal admission, and emotional reckoning. A video began to play. The narration was calm, almost intimate. It spoke of how long-term emotional betrayal doesn't always arrive as chaos or infidelity. It can drift in quietly, disguised as personal growth. Scenes unfolded, fictional, yet eerily close to real life. The voice explained, "Sometimes when someone says they need space, what they're actually expressing is that they've stopped seeing you as a living, feeling person. You've become background noise, constant, quiet, invisible. There, always. Until you're not." Marin's hands trembled slightly. "It goes live next week," Reed said softly. "It's not about you, not directly, but it's about people like you. People who burn bridges and convince themselves the smoke is wisdom." Her eyes welled with tears. "Why would you do this to me?" "Because I had to speak," he replied, steady and calm. "You silenced me, with borrowed philosophies, with slogans dressed up as truth. You edited our story while we were still writing it together," he leaned forward. "So now, I'm writing the ending." This wasn't revenge delivered with fury. It was quiet, so quiet it found your bones and stayed there, echoing. The next day, Marin woke with a weight in her chest and a phone buzzing with endless alerts. The campaign had exploded. Reclamation was everywhere. 3 major platforms picked it up. Headlines screamed, "When faithfulness became unfashionable, she drifted, he documented, he didn't clap back, he told the truth." Reed never used her name, not once, but everyone who knew them understood. At work, every glance felt like a judgment. Eden had taken a leave, personal time to process. HR called her in, casual in tone, but with a definite edge. "Keep your private life off the public timeline." The silence she once craved now roared wherever she went. The online comments were worse. "She sounds like someone who read a blog post on polyamory and blew up a stable relationship." He wasn't bitter. He was honest. That's why it hurt. This stung more than cheating ever could. She disconnected and called it growth. Marin logged off. She couldn't bear to see more. That weekend, she stayed inside, ignoring every call. Even her father, distant, rarely involved, sent a message. "I'm here if you need me. I saw it. I'm sorry." She stared at the screen until it dimmed and turned black. The only voice she wished she could silence was her own, the one that had cried out for freedom, never realizing it was begging for isolation. On a dull Monday morning, she walked into a therapist's office. A kind woman named Thea welcomed her, offered warm tea, and asked a question that broke her open. "When did you start believing you weren't worthy of gentle, whole love?" The tears arrived before any words. In the weeks that followed, therapy became a refuge. Marin opened up, about routines that felt like cages, about the creeping loneliness she hadn't noticed until it had roots, about how Eden's conviction seduced her, and how shame threaded itself through every memory. Thea didn't preach. She only asked, "Why?" Again and again, until Marin had no more corners to hide her guilt in. "I think I mistook peace for pain," she whispered once, "and I believed being wanted meant being indispensable." Thea nodded gently. "That's honest," she said, "and that's where we start the healing." Meanwhile, Reed's world was evolving. Reclamation had momentum. Nina, his manager, booked media appearances. He accepted a podcast invitation, hesitant, not for fame, but because people, mostly men, began writing to him. Dozens, then hundreds. They shared stories of being quietly abandoned, of being told their steadiness wasn't attractive, of being mocked for not transforming fast enough when their partners embraced evolved ideals of love. Each letter began with his name, Reed Whitaker. He replied to most, never gloated. Never blamed Marin, not once. His campaign wasn't retribution, it was reflection. After one especially moving podcast, a message came through. Thank you. You said what I've never had the courage to admit. I thought I was the problem, for not being progressive enough. Reed stared at the message for a long time, 10 minutes, maybe more. Then he set the phone down, and in the hush that followed, something settled inside him. He was finally at peace. The apartment that had once offered Marin refuge now felt hollow, stripped of warmth. The burgundy dress was gone, donated without ceremony. Eden's number was gone too, permanently blocked. Every photo that no longer captured her authentic self had been deleted. She had found her way back to painting, a passion she had buried when life became a relentless stream of bills, chores, and expectations. But the deepest transformation began when she started to write. At first, it was just raw thoughts poured into a journal, kept hidden. Over time, it morphed into a blog, anonymous, unfiltered, untamed. She named it What I Miss while trying to be interesting. It never gained traction, but it became her lifeline. Each post peeled back another layer, of ego, of avoidance, of that human impulse to chase the unknown simply because fixing what's broken feels too daunting. She wrote about Eden, about that night, about the way her husband's hands trembled on the steering wheel as they drove home in silence. Weeks later, a single message appeared in her inbox. It was from Reed, short, honest. I read your last post. I know it's you. I'm not angry, but I don't miss you either. Maybe that's a sign we're both starting to heal. Take care. R. Marin cried harder than she had in years, not out of grief, but out of recognition. That message was their final goodbye. No bitterness, just truth. Time kept moving. She no longer expected to hear from Reed. His message stayed pinned to the top of her inbox, opened once, then left untouched. She never deleted it. It became a quiet gravestone for a chapter already burned to embers. Eventually, she moved out of the apartment. There were too many ghosts in its corners. Her new place was smaller, slightly worn, imperfect, but completely her own. Every object inside it was chosen by her and for her. No shared tokens, no echoes of what used to be. Just her. She continued to paint under a flickering bulb. She still wrote, not for recognition, but to stay honest. And gradually, other women began to reach out, not in public, but softly, in private. Some admitted to leaving good men in pursuit of passion, only to end up scorched. Others admired her bravery, even if they couldn't walk her path themselves. Her response remained constant. Don't trade your soul just to feel free. One quiet Sunday, in the hush of a downtown bookstore, she saw Reed. He was across the room, flipping through the pages of a biography. He looked changed, more settled, lighter somehow, like someone who'd made it through something painful and come out whole. She considered walking up to him, until she saw the woman beside him. Unassuming. Present. Their glances spoke in a private language that needed no words. Reed smiled, murmured something, and the woman bumped him gently with her elbow, grinning. Marin turned before he saw her. No tears came, no sting, just a soft smile. He had found his peace, and she had found hers. That night, she wrote her last entry. I once loved a man who recognized my truth before I did. I lost him chasing something bigger than either of us. But he was never the problem. I just wasn't ready to stop running. I'm not proud of the person I was, but I am proud of the woman I've become. I don't know what love will look like for me now, but I know it won't involve pretending. I'm done with that. She clicked publish, shut the laptop, and for the first time in ages, she didn't feel broken, just whole and free. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.